Good afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry we're getting started just a minute late. We had a few technical difficulties just as the meeting started, so I apologize for that. I want to welcome you to the February 23rd PRSA Kansas chapter meeting. We're excited to be here today and have two great presenters who are ready to speak with us. My name is Christy Bonsmer, and I'm the president of PRSA this year. We are looking forward to a great year, and we do miss seeing everyone in person, but hopefully later this year we can all get together in person and see each other face to face, whether we have a mask on or, just we'll pretend we see each other smile when we see each other in person. If you haven't done so already, we invite you to like our PRSA Kansas Facebook page. We also have a group on there, the PRSA Kansas Community Group. That's great for more in-depth conversations and bouncing ideas off each other. So we encourage you to go in and join that group as well. During our meeting today, feel free to post any questions in the chat and we will get to those as we can. And I'm going to turn the meeting over to Akeem Ashford, who is our vice president. He is going to introduce our speakers today. And I'm excited to hear their presentation. And I'm just glad that you're all here with us.
Thanks so much, Christy. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Hey, listen, I'm so excited about today's presentation. We've got Denise Sherman as well as Tijuana Hardwell. And so we're going to have Denise go first, and then Tijuana is going to follow up and end us. And then we'll have a Q&A at the end. Denise serves as the executive director of the Kansas African American Museum, which is located right here in Wichita, Kansas, and has been in this position since August of 2018. In this role, Denise has the responsibility for the oversight, development, and delivery of our exhibitions, historical archives, educational, and cultural awareness programs, which has resulted in the overall branding message, "We Are Culture." The mission of the Kansas African American Museum endeavors to make the Kansas African American experience resonate with every Kansan. Tijuana Hardwell is an entrepreneur and committed community member in Wichita, Kansas. She earned her BA in communications from Wichita State University. In 2011, she launched Mamarazzi Entertainment Magazine, an independent urban entertainment magazine. The publication continues to highlight emerging artists, small business owners, and community leaders. In July 2020, she launched Mamarazzi Communications LLC to support small business owners, organizations, and entertainers in expanding their reach. She was enlisted by the Wichita Black Alliance and the African American Council of Elders to manage their Facts, Not Fear communication campaign, and was tasked with creating culturally sensitive messaging regarding COVID. Her most notable client is former NBA player and Hall of Famer Gary Payton. In 2020, she was named one of Women Who Lead in Marketing and Communications by the Wichita Business Journal. So with no further ado, Ms. Denise Sherman, please.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to share information today with you related to the Kansas African American Museum and our experience going into this new territory called virtual COVID, if you will. And before I get going, I just want to send out shout out and kudos to our other speaker, Ms. Tijuana Hardwell, because her Facts Not Fear program, if you've had an opportunity to see that, was absolutely on point, on target. And so just wanted to let you know how impressed I was with the messaging in such a critical time. So congratulations to you, Ms. Hardwell. So our program, what I'm going to share with you today, from venue to virtual, the Kansas African American Museum experience is basically just that. We are a venue, if you will, as an art museum, a historical site, a place where we do cultural immersion, education opportunities, all of those things, where we relied on people coming to our location. And so let's just go to the next slide. And absolutely, this new period of COVID just turned us right side up, end over end. It was certainly a new venture for us, and we were not ready. I'm sure as a lot of people were not ready and prepared for this new reality, if you will. So the mission of the Kansas African American Museum is to, as was stated by Akeem, endeavors to make the African American experience resonate with every Kansan. And we do not take that lightly, as though we operate, mainly in the and the Wichita area, it has been our focus the last couple of years to make sure that we are reaching areas across the state. Next slide, please. And so in doing so, TKAAM provides a culminating experience of people, pride, and place where we celebrate the richness of the African American experience and its indelible influence on the American culture, tradition, language, art, and music that continues to define our country today. And when you think about that, that is quite a broad swath or broad reaching, because the African American experience in our country, in our history, is American experience. And you really can't separate the two. And when you look at contemporary things, you'll find a lot of that influences over time has made its way into contemporary culture, if you will, or other areas of life. So we always look to embrace opportunities where everyone gets to experience the African American culture. And so what's before you is a picture of our museum. If you have not been at our location, we're located downtown, just directly north of the county. And we are in an historical building, if you will. This is one of the original two buildings that were part of the African American community in the late 1800s and early 1900s, if you will. And there are only two buildings that have remained standing from this era. That is our building, which was formerly the Calvary Baptist Church, and then another building that's on North Main, one block over. And it is also, both buildings are owned by the county and maintained by the county, and we appreciate all of their support and assistance. But the other building is housing for, I think, the disabilities program that they have there, and it was the former Ark Valley Lodge. And so we are very proud of this over 100-year-old building with all its creaks and crannies and all the things that go along with it, because it adds such character and depth, and it really helps us embody the story and the messaging that we're wanting to give to our community. And so your experience is really part of it, is just coming to that building and having a chance to understand that this was built by African American community at a time when Wichita was really developing. And in this area, which was formerly known as the Black District or the Black Belt, West End, and there were several other names that it was referred to, was really at the hub of the African American community originally. So let's go to our next slide. Right now, as if I were to share with you what TKAAM embodies, it's really our four pillars. And it's our historical or our heritage archives, which is our documents, our photos, all of the things that tell our original story, our current story, our story of being African American. The Kansas African American Museum, before it was the museum, was actually the first Black Historical Society in 1975. And so that came about right after the church moved to a new location, and the building was in jeopardy of being dismantled, torn down, whatever. And so several of the congregants decided that was not going to happen. And so the building was saved from the wrecking ball, but it was made the Black Historical Museum, Black Historical Society for that reason and for that purpose. We also, as part of our pillars, the art collection and artifacts, which we are extremely proud of. We formally moved into the realm of a museum in 1995. We also offer education services and programs, and then cultural awareness and cultural enrichment is a big part of our experience. Next slide. So 2020 BC, before COVID. This was a time when most of our activity was centered around the museum itself coming to our location. And so we were very proud of being a destination for these experiences, whether it was related to the history, the archives, or the heritage, whether it was coming to see our current art exhibition or one of our core exhibitions, whether you were there for an educational program or whether you were there for a cultural event. Next slide. And so before COVID, most of our activity was pretty traditional, as you can imagine, with any event or any museum or any similar type of organization. So we had our membership and our visitors, those that pretty much supported our offerings. Our activity with them was pretty regular. We also had community supporters who would, allow us to usually would select one of the pillars that they were most interested in and support us in that realm. Of course, our board of directors, our organizations and businesses, which form partnerships, alliances, and sponsorships, and then our arts and events and special events for the most part that would drive people into the museum for some particular topic or event. Next slide. And so right before COVID, this was our last event before the big shutdown, of about 100 days, maybe 90 days. And so on March the 28th, Saturday, March 28th, we hosted an event which we had a packed house. It was a event called We Were There, African American Women in the
data is not.
Event. And this event was a partnership between League of Women Voters, the census representatives from the US Census. We also had voter registration representatives there, organizations in our community, Delta Sigma Theta, Alpha Kappa Alpha, and others who all came together to have this big topic and this big discussion and this big experience around women in the suffrage movement. And this was when we were really celebrating the 19th Amendment last year, if you all kind of remember, as we were celebrating 150 years as well. So we kind of went out with a bang. Saturday, we had a big opportunity. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see a little bit more. And then come Monday, we were closed. And so with that, you can see how important it is for us to have these events and attract people to come in and have these conversations, if you will, or to learn more about how we were part of the of history, if you will. Next slide. So we all are familiar with COVID-19 guidelines. And so there's really not much I need to share with you here other than when we started to really realize what has to happen next. All the things that came into play for us were social distancing, small group tours, canceled tours. How do we handle the sanitation stations along with our exhibitions? What does it mean to do something like an online reservation? How do we get people in and out? Do we delay our exhibition? How is this going to affect our attendance? Is it going to be low attendance or no attendance? And what was our virtual options? And so all of that immediately bubbled up to the surface for us during the COVID-19 experience right up front. And so the next slide. And so we just pretty much call that virtual reality 2.0, because now we are in a virtual space that we were not really prepared for, we were not anticipating, and we had to rethink all channels of communication. And one of the things that had to happen first was really determine who we needed to communicate to and how do we communicate with them. And so a big part of our support system was our seniors through our Senior Wednesday programs, and also from the standpoint that they were our most loyal membership base. And they were also part of our think tank, if you will, because a lot of things in the African American culture, we rely on the wisdom and the sage advice of our seniors. And they are so willing to give that because, of course, they know so many things, many more things that we don't know. But they also allow us to really have the strength and the courage and confidence to explore and to move forward. But that was the group that we had the hardest time reaching out to, because now, poof, they're gone. We had schools that we needed to interact with. We had a very robust relationship and activity schedule with them. Of course, our membership, community at large, stakeholders, and organizations. And so we basically broke it down into those areas as how we were going to figure out what we needed to do next. in our virtual reality of 2.0. Next slide. And this is what we basically found out very quickly. Seniors had challenges with social media and technology, and of course they were not coming out the house. So that immediately cut off a very critical part of our existence. Schools, they were uncertain with their new prospect of virtual school. Membership, somewhat unresponsive for 90 days because we were right in the middle of our membership drive. So how do you have a membership drive when you're not even sure what the next step is? Community, everyone was pretty uncertain at this point. And so our partnerships and collaborations were on hold. Stakeholders, they were all figuring out how the resources and funding was going to move forward. And then organizations were all repositioning their staff at home. So all this is going on at the same time while we're trying to navigate and figure out what we are going to do next. Of course, we were at home as well. We were looking at our budget and our resources. We were figuring out community-wise what partnerships and collaborations would be most vital and which ones could we try to salvage. And then again, figuring out what to do with our membership drive, how we're going to handle our activities with our school children, our school age kids, and then our most, again, senior group of people who are our most loyal supporters. Next slide. So we immediately needed to retool everything that we were doing. Everything that we had lined up for 2020 and beyond had to have a new reality, if you will. That included our exhibitions, which again, we had a new exhibition that was starting in April, Shades of Strength and Beauty, which was scheduled to have a opening that had to be delayed, what programs that were in the pipeline, activities, and our outreach. One of the things that we determined was that we did not want to go into a situation where we were only looking at short-term and immediate, because we did not want to put ourselves into a position and that would cause us more issues with intermediate and long-term activities. So one of the things that we quickly retooled was our education with our schools. We figured that that would be the one that would have the most return, if we would, on investment. And we at that time did not really have a solid online engagement. So we developed the TKAAM Online Engagement Center, which worked very well with our new positioning, We Are Culture. And this was developed as an online platform to allow people to have some type of communication or engagement or experience with us from a virtual format. This was offered, of course, free, and our hopes were that we would be able to expand across the state, which that has happened. Next slide. Our next big risk, if you will, was our signature fundraiser, which is really vital for our sustainability from year to year. So each year we had a traditional, well, for the past 20 years, a traditional signature event that is a fundraising event, as well as a opportunity to acknowledge and induct our Trailblazers Hall of Fame inductees. And so we did this in the past in a traditional format of an evening at the Hyatt Regency, 3 to 4 hours, traditional dinner, featured speaker, induction of our Trailblazer inductees, and then an hour of socializing and opportunity to network. Well, that was totally out the window as well, because we were no longer able to use that format. What we ended up doing, though, was rethinking this totally and deciding that this would be an opportunity for us to expand in a virtual format with a 1-hour presentation that really allowed us to think beyond and to do more than we ever thought we could do. So the retooling of the Trailblazers Hall of Fame resulted in us having a broadcast of 1 hour in the Wichita and in the Topeka markets. with KWCH Channel 12. This program, which really took a lot of, we really had to redesign and retool the actual presentation itself because we could no longer do it in the format that we once had. Took the feel of a awards presentation, if you will, but we also wanted to work in our education components, and we also wanted to make sure that we had a connection with the community. And so we highlighted a community group as a feature, and then we also told part of the TKAAM story as a theme throughout the event. Our results were that we ended up having viewership from the broadcast side of 30,000 people in both markets, and each viewer household was a representative of 2.5 persons. So we expanded from our traditional 350 to 400 people who would normally attend the event to way beyond that. We also received support from 15 states that we had watch parties where people gathered and watched our event, and these were organized in small group events. So 15 states were representative and 5 countries. We were as far as Australia, we were in Germany, we received support from Africa and 2 other states and countries, and I just can't think of what they are at the moment. But that was way beyond what we thought we could do. We were just wanting to have an event, right? And hoping that we can keep this going. If you go to the next slide, you'll see our honorees for the Trailblazers.
Denise, can I back up just a little bit? Someone had a question. They were curious about how many schools were using your online engagement center across the state.
Well, our online, so what we do is we have people from Independence, Western Kansas, but we mainly register them from an individual and not the school itself. We promote it to the schools because we do not charge the schools. But what we have done with our recent partnerships through other organizations, and I think I see Teresa on here as well, we do virtual programming through their organization to the school itself, through their platform. So one of the things we really wanted to do was not reinvent the wheel. If someone else had a channel or a platform that was already available and servicing what we needed to get done, we were not wanting to replace it or reinvent it. We would certainly partner with them and use theirs, but our promotions out to the individuals were through the schools were individuals. So just have the individuals sign up through our TKAAM Online Engagement Center. And anyone can do that. It just doesn't necessarily have to be schools, but that was our first target. Here's a picture of our awardees from our Trailblazers: Dr. Charlotte Smith, Miss Janetta Everett, Hattie McDaniel posthumously, Miss Carla Eccles, Sam Ford from the Washington Bureau, and Miss Doris Kerr-Larkins is basically a honoree who helped save our building, and the Trailblazers, or the Doris Kerr-Larkins Rising Star Award, is for her honor. Next slide. From there, we kind of gained our wings, and we've been able to embrace the virtual realm. And so one of the things that I would like to share is that while this was all new for us, we really had to come to grips that things were not going to be the same, and that we were going to need to communicate with our base and develop new bases in order to move forward. So TKAAM Thursdays is our newest opportunity to engage with the museum. We air this 30-minute program every first and third Thursday of the month. And this is billed as your cultural midday break. And so while you have the opportunity to see this on Thursdays, it is available in our website and also online at Facebook. And this gives you an opportunity to learn more about us and have an experience virtually, as people are still at home, people are still using their personal devices, and people are still not coming back to the museum in the numbers that we had prior to COVID. Next slide. Our current exhibition is a partnership with the Wichita Art Museum, Old Ridge Museum of Wichita State University, and arts partners. And ironically, this conversation started prior to COVID and was already well underway before this happened. So as we are working our way back to getting people back to the museum, we want to share that this exhibition, along with the other partners, that we encourage you to still come out in small groups and see what we have to offer, because, you know, we were really, really concerned about moving into this next virtual space and not gaining or not having people come back to our location. And we are still a venue designation. So we did not want to cannibalize or did not want to minimize or diminish our standing, because art and music is so personal. Yes, we can have an experience virtually, but I tell you, I so miss concerts, and I love going to places and museums, and I want to get to the movies, and I want to eat out and all those things. And you just really have a different experience when you are in convening with others. So I have 2 more slides and then I'll be done and we'll pass it on to Tawana. So tips for our engagement is what I would share with you. First of all, we really had to acknowledge COVID-19. We could have very easily just said, okay, we're going to just keep going down the path that we know and what we're familiar with, but we had to really stop and catch our breath and just really acknowledge it and say it's here and we don't like it. And so when that settled in, we decided that we would just let go and really acknowledge our loss, because the museum and our experiences prior will never be the same, no matter how we look at it. Coming off of such a wonderful event on March 28th and then going into basically opposite ends where there's nothing was quite traumatic. And so I speak to you in that realm because it really was. I mean, we just didn't know what to do with ourselves. But after we got over that, we decided we would be open to new ideas and that we would allow ourselves to be vulnerable and we would ask for help. For me, being a more seasoned senior person who is not as versed in technology, the whole fright for me to move into a total virtual space was just something I really didn't want to do, but I had to do it. And luckily, with the staff being younger and some of them more experienced, very encouraging that we can occupy this space and still maintain our other space as well. So embracing technology, which turned out to be our friend, was critical in us communicating. And I still, you know, have reservations at times, and sometimes I have to be talked off the ledge. And there's times that I don't get where this is going and where is this landing. I'm okay with sharing and expressing that now because it is what it is. We developed a communication plan that allowed us to figure out who and where we need to communicate. So I don't want you to go back to the slide, but if you remember the earlier slide where we identified who our membership and who our stakeholders were, working with our seniors was a lot different than working with our partners and our organizations. And it was a lot different with working in the schools. And so we had to ask them, how would you like to best be communicated? With our seniors, it's print and phone calls. Simple. But when you're in the midst of turmoil, you don't always think about how simple things could be. So simply having our volunteers or making phone calls and saying, we're going to do this. Can you go there? Can you do that? Turn on your television, or let us help you have an experience, or did you get our latest print piece, made all the difference in the world. Using the multiple channels, this is where we get into social media again, which I went kicking and dragging and screaming because I'm not a big social media person, but I survived that first year. I even went on Facebook. And I know for some of you probably think, are you kidding me? But for me, no, I just wasn't even in that space. But I had to embrace it and I had to learn how to navigate in order to keep the communication channel, because people want to hear from the executive director, right? I can't go somewhere and decide that I'm not going to engage because I don't like the process or the method that's before me. But now after a year, I'm still surviving. I'm still okay. And I'm actually enjoying it. So COVID which forced us into that, or forced me into that, it probably would not have happened if I could have done something else. And then finally, simplifying our message. We needed to make sure that regardless of our channel or our demographic or our program or whatever our offering was, it had to be consistent amongst all of them. And so We Are Culture, which is our branding statement, we think is very simple, lets people know why we're here and what we're doing. And then whether you choose an educational or a cultural or a historical heritage event, or an educational program, or even our art exhibition, you know that's what our purpose is. And finally, my last slide, and I am done if you have any questions, and I hope that made sense.
Okay, question from Megan Carver. She says, I love the online engagement center. The content is fantastic. How much of the content did you have to produce because of COVID, and how much was repurposing what you already had?
Thank you for that question. Most of it was we had to develop it on the fly, actually, right then and there. But we had some archival segments that were Black history oriented from one of our media partners, and they were thrilled to allow us to put that in our programming. So you'll see some 30-second or 30-second somewhat Black history moments that Channel 10 produced. And so we incorporated those. The beautiful thing about it is they were already with people who were doing things at the museum. And so it was very natural for us to include them. So we did that, and it really worked out great for us, because really what we wanted to do here is however you want the experience, whether it's a 30-second or a couple of minutes, or whether you wanted to do one of our longer programs that's 15 or 19 minutes, you have a choice. And so we're still constantly updating and pulling that program together. And with that, we will keep that, it will be a mainstay. And from there, our TKAAM Thursdays actually was developed, a year later, because we felt that we wanted a more direct connection for people to tune in. But thank you.
Okay. And another one from Jamie Reed. Thank you for everything you have done to bring your message to our community in 2020. Did you find that you became a spokesperson on other issues, maybe even COVID issues, for the African American community by virtue of your position at TKAAM?
There were some opportunities for us to do that, but I tell you, there were other groups that were managing that messaging much better than we were. And so again, with partnerships, we joined in with them. And so if they were messaging, such as with Ms. Hardwell, and we'll share, I'm sure, if they were messaging that we didn't feel it was necessary for us to duplicate it or put efforts into that, we just pushed out their messaging. So that was one of the other things that we determined early on, was that shared resources were better than no resources. And so as we were wanting to provide another avenue for people to navigate through COVID, because, museums, art, entities, music, all of those things, they actually provide, I believe, provide another way for people to cope. And so as you're getting maybe hard messaging about what has to happen here, you also need to have other messaging, as there's other things that you can do to work through this period. So we determined we were not going to duplicate messaging. So anytime that came to us, depending on what it was, we would look to see if our partners were doing that same or similar. And if they were, then we politely either ushered that in or referred the person to them, and did not want to get into that space. And I think it worked well for us, because it kept us focused on what we needed to do, and we were not competing, if you will, with anyone else.
Great, thank you. Well, if there aren't any more questions for Denise, we will move over and start with Tijuana's presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to, of course, commend Ms. Denise, because as someone who is on social media, just to see the presence of TKAAM really elevate on that platform during that time was amazing to be able to see. So we were definitely watching, and we were applauding you all and sharing your content. And so I thought that it was absolutely amazing. So I am Tijuana Hardwell, and I am the owner of Mamarazzi Communications, which is a strategic marketing and communications company. And so I'll really be talking about diversity in the message. And I'm so glad that Ms. Denise really tackled so many of those issues that I think that we had had alike. And that was messaging even for seniors during this time, and being able to bridge that gap. So next slide, thank you. All right. So what I'll be covering is just speaking very briefly about Mamarazzi Communications and being enlisted to assist with the Facts Not Fear communication campaign, which really was about providing COVID information, education, resources in the wake of COVID to African Americans living in Sedgwick County. Also inclusion in the messaging. Not only did I have the responsibility when enlisted for this project to provide messaging to African Americans in the community, I had to dig deep and make sure that we even broke that down, providing messaging that was just crafted for seniors, messaging that was just crafted for school age people, college age people, club going age, and then also acknowledging some other barriers that exist within the African American community, such as mental illness and poverty in the wake of COVID. Creating that framework for the message and making sure that it was culturally sensitive. And then of course, I will also be given just some bullet points on how your organization can also thrive by incorporating diversity into the message. Next slide, thank you. All right, so Mamarazzi Communications is a Wichita-based company. I graduated from WSU. I currently assist through consultation. I work with people all over the country. I work with entertainers, people who are in the music business. One of my most notable clients is Gary Payton, former NBA player and Hall of Famer. And then, of course, I most recently worked on the hardest project that I have ever tackled with the Mamarazzi Communications, and that was being enlisted by the Wichita Black Alliance and African American Council of Elders in order to manage their Facts Not Fear communication campaign. Collectively, Wichita Black Alliance and African American Council of Elders was awarded, through application, was awarded almost $500,000. A piece of that was communications, and then a piece of that was focused on mental health and wellness. And so I was the project manager for the communications campaign, which received $307,000 roughly for that piece. Next slide. So the Facts Not Fear campaign, it really is named Facts Not Fear because there was so much that we had to overcome in order to provide messaging to people in the African American community. And we had to acknowledge the fear that does exist, but really educate them through the facts and encourage them to make the best decisions for themselves and their families and the people who they know and love. So we were tasked with creating culturally sensitive messaging pertaining to COVID, responsible for communicating to Sedgwick County's African American population that the county reports that there are 44,037 African Americans living in Sedgwick County. Also addressing fears about COVID. There's so much fear as it relates to getting tested. I think a lot of people have, no matter what background you have, a lot of people had a lot of fear about getting tested for COVID, and then also the fear around vaccination. And so we were responsible for identifying non-traditional media partners and businesses. Next slide. Some of the challenges that we had was acknowledging the African American community's fear of medical professionals. The Tuskegee experiment was not that far, it was not that long ago. And so oftentimes when we spoke with people in the African American community, whether we were talking about testing or whether we were talking about vaccinations, and I think anytime there's a there's a pandemic or an outbreak of any kind, I think that it brings back up some of the unpleasant history with medical professionals, with the Tuskegee experiment being something that is brought up so often because there were African American men and essentially women also who were infected with syphilis and left untreated, and it still does invoke fear in Black communities. Then also the distrust of media. Unfortunately, media has had a long history of not painting minorities in a positive light. And so there are people within the African American community who really do tune out, tune out a lot of mainstream media. And then also, yet again, the challenge of a lack of representation. When minority groups don't necessarily see themselves in the messaging, it can actually lack impact for what it's intended to do. And so those were just some of the challenges that we had to really overcome in management of this Facts Not Fear campaign. Next slide, thank you. One of the first things that I did as a project manager was we identified mainstream media, urban radio outlets, podcasters, influencers, and content creators who were probably, they weren't mainstream. We identified some mainstream media, but we also had the responsibility of identifying people who probably had had different niches within the African American community. So maybe that was a sports show that we were able to tap in order to put out COVID messaging. Maybe that was a local musician with a great following and platform who we partnered with in order to get their involvement in the messaging that we did also. We also utilized Black medical professionals. We hosted several virtual town halls during the time of this campaign, which dated October through December. So we had a very short amount of time also. So the campaign itself was October through December of last year. We used several medical professionals who could attest to how real this was. I think people often forget that right out the gate, there was misinformation about COVID. And I don't know if this refreshes anyone's memory, but African Americans were told initially, through rumor mill, that they could not contract COVID. It was the craziest thing. I never bought into that. I never subscribed to that whatsoever, but that was the information that people received very early on before there was a lot of information pertaining to COVID. And so utilizing Black medical professionals with correcting that narrative and also providing ways that we would be able to, of course, curb the spread. Next slide. So this was one of the virtual town halls that we did. Young people were considered the spreaders of COVID, still going out to clubs, still having, house parties, get-togethers, and not really taking COVID seriously had been what young people had been accused of doing. We were able to involve young people in, first and foremost, correcting that narrative, and also sharing their own personal testimonial about what they were doing to indeed curb the spread of COVID. That was hosted by Director of Strategic Communications and PRSA, Vice President, Mr. Akeem Ashford. And then we involved college students, we involved educators, people who are a part of organizations that serve young people. We did involve a nightclub DJ who did contract COVID. And he mentioned about his mental health just really taking a hit during COVID. And he shared a really amazing story on this particular virtual town hall in which he encouraged people to actually get out of the clubs, stay away from the clubs. And that was really, really bold for a DJ as popular as DJ Barefoot to actually tell people that, hey, I've had COVID, you don't want it. And so involving him in that messaging just really had a lot of impact. When we surveyed after this virtual town hall, people could not believe how much young people were actually indeed doing in order to protect themselves against COVID. And so this was our way of being able to correct that narrative and also, use each of these people to be able to make an impact and really touch the people in their age demographic. Next slide. Thank you. It was so important for us to use real community members. As we crafted commercials and marketing materials, we addressed the concerns that we were hearing. We also involved community members, young, older, seniors, business owners, and educators. That was so very important for us to do. We didn't want it to have just one look. We didn't want to use stock photos, although these are stock photos now, don't blame me. But we did not want to use stock photos on this. We wanted to make sure that we used real people who people would be able to identify and say, hey, you know, that's Nicole Atkins. You know, she's an actor. She's a community member. Hey, that's Buddy Rowe. This is someone who I know and I see, you know, daily. These are people who I look up to in the community. So that was very, very important for us to be able to do. And we also had to involve people who were directly impacted. I know that even pretty far into the shutdown and the pandemic, there were still people who said, you know, I don't know if this is real because I don't know anyone who has had COVID, which was actually incorrect. What we found out through this campaign is that there were people who were ashamed of the fact that they contracted COVID. So they were not sharing with people that they had COVID. There were several young people, there were several people in general that I would do these open calls and say, hey, is there anyone who has lost a family member? And I would have people inbox me and say, hey, you know, I just buried a family member last week due to COVID. And I would ask them, I would acknowledge the hurt and the pain. And I would ask them if they were comfortable with sharing that in a future town hall to be able to educate people, inform people, and also, of course, spread a message, letting people know how serious this was. And many of them declined. They would share that their family members were super embarrassed that their loved one had passed due to COVID. A lot of that was because if you contracted COVID, there was the idea that you were being irresponsible, that you ignored all of the forewarning, that you did not take it seriously. And that's why so many people were not actually sharing that they had COVID. Fortunately for us, we were able to get people who were willing to share their personal story. And that gave a lot of impact. That was great feedback that we received from people who said, hey, I now identify someone who has had it, and I better understand what the long-term impact is of COVID. Next slide. Thank you. Doing messaging for seniors. I shared earlier that this had been the most challenging project that I have ever embarked on. A lot of that had to do with seniors who we knew, were taking this a lot more seriously than anyone. They still wanted messaging that catered towards them. We really did not feel initially that we had to do a lot of communication to elders, because when it was made public that seniors were more likely to die or be hospitalized due to COVID, we saw so many seniors, really retreat to their homes. We didn't see a lot of them coming out. I know that I'm involved in many different organizations, and those seniors were really quick to say, hey, someone walk me through how to do Zoom. That's just what it was. All right. So we didn't really think that we had to do a lot of messaging for them, but eventually they were reaching out and saying, hey, please make sure that you do messaging for us, include us in this messaging. Hey, I still have people, my sister or my, my family member, this is what seniors were telling us. We still want messaging for us. And so we did switch gears, and we made sure to do that. And we also wanted to educate younger people that by them not taking it seriously, they could possibly go around elders and impact them. So next slide, thank you. I mentioned a little bit earlier about club goers being considered the spreaders. It was really important for us to encourage people to celebrate differently. I am a single mom of a 13-year-old. We go big for her birthday. Every year we go big for her birthday. it pained me to try something differently for her birthday. But we actually did a virtual party that she was over the moon about. Her friends and their parents were like, oh my gosh, who would have thought to do a virtual party like this? And so we did like porch drop-offs of their gift bags and that sort of thing. And they got together through Zoom. And so we really wanted to encourage people to, you don't have to not celebrate, you just have to do it safely, and you have to think outside the box. So we purchased billboards through this campaign. And keep in mind, October, November, December, you're hitting into family tradition. You're in that holiday season. And so we had to put messaging out that reminded them, the dance floor looks different this year. All right. It's going to be your kitchen. It's going to be your living room. And so we encourage people that way. We also encourage people to still connect with seniors, still connect with their loved ones and their friends virtually. All right. Next slide. We know how controversial this mask or to not mask has been. People on opposing sides. It was really important for us to take the Republican, Democratic rhetoric out of this, because everybody supports local business. Everyone supports local business. Wichita especially, we just take a lot of pride in supporting small businesses. And so we encourage them to actually support local business by wearing a mask. There were people who reached out and were like, you guys got us, because in their opinion, they might have been torn on whether or not to wear a mask, but if they wanted to support local business, they had to wear a mask in order to go into these establishments. And it was also just creating the rhetoric that probably did not exist before, that if you do support local business, do what you can so that we don't endure another shutdown. Next slide. All right, so after the completion of the Facts Not Fear campaign, which wrapped up on December 30th, again, we utilized CARES Act funding in order to support this initiative. We did survey. We surveyed the public to get some feedback. 82.7% shared that it was important to them that we use real African Americans living in Sedgwick County in the messaging that we created. Next slide. 65.4% actually shared that it was important to them that we use podcasters and influencers. So that did have some impact. Next slide. And then 86.3% shared that it was important to them that we did use medical professionals that were African American and lived within Sedgwick County. So that was also really important for them. Next slide. All right, so the framework for the messaging, we understand that some places of business, may not have all of the diversity in the world. And when I talk about diversity, I am not speaking just about people who are minority in a sense of race and ethnicity. This could be a business that lacks women, the presence of women. It could be a job or a workplace or a company or organization that probably is unbalanced in having people who may be LGBTQ. This could be people who lack young people or people who lack older people. It's really important to invite and welcome brainstorm sessions that can introduce many perspectives. Welcome brainstorm sessions within your company and your organization that really do allow opposing ideas. Through this process, again, I'm a part of the Wichita Black Alliance, and that is representative of so many organizations within Sedgwick County. And there are people who just have different viewpoints. So when I would report out about what my angle was and how I was strategizing and what I would do, it would be so great for someone to say to me, hey, what do you think about getting some messaging out to USD 259? Hey, the schools are not open right now, but maybe you can partner with the school district in order to get messaging sent out to young people electronically. And we did that. There were also ideas that were about making sure that during this time, what could we do in order to connect people to resources? Just think, in the wake of COVID, people were losing their jobs. People still needed to eat. Those were concerns. It wasn't just about wearing a mask, getting tested, and getting the vaccination. It was just as much about making sure that we addressed, poverty in communities and mental illness. And that really came from getting an unpopular or a less thought about perspective in these brainstorm sessions. And so just considering all voices. Next slide. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, so I'm going to zoom through. Your organization can thrive with diversity and messaging. The more people who you are able to involve in this messaging, who look different, who have different backgrounds, finding out, from such a large pool of people, or even a small pool of people, about what different background that they have. And I'm just using as an example, Ms. Denise and I, although, we're both of the African-American community, we come from two different backgrounds, I'm quite sure. I'm sure that her experiences are so much different than mine, and we think differently. There's diversity even in that. And of course, making sure that we promote inclusivity and expanding our reach. So that's how we can really thrive in our organizations, by welcoming people who, pretty soon you sit in a group long enough and everyone starts thinking alike. Welcome in those people who maybe do not engage all the time. Next slide. All right, and so how to achieve it, and these are just some points, and I'll just touch on them very, very quickly. Diversity in your workspace. I kind of shared about encouraging people who seldom contribute to the discussion to provide valuable input, tapping local organizations. And so if your organization is unbalanced or are lacking something as you're looking to put out messaging, whether that's marketing or just educational information, making sure that you either join local chambers or even contact local chambers and ask them for their input. Ask if they can send a representative to come to your meeting or your workspace to be able to share thoughts and input. Inviting representatives or members from specialty organizations such as Black Nurses Association, Hispanic American Leadership Organization, Wichita Urban Professionals, attending network and mingle events, attending those types of events throughout your city, whether they're celebrating professionals and community members or they're doing something outside of the box, making sure that you go and you're present and can do that. Even if you send a couple of your staff, your members of your staff, just to go and support those events, it could be an opportunity for you to engage and share information. And then of course, making an open call. Using your social media to create an open call is great. It's been phenomenal. As I put out information and I was looking to engage with people who had been directly impacted by COVID, that's where I found so much value, because people reached out to me and said, hey, I just found out that a friend of mine or a girl on Facebook has been talking about how a family member just died. And they would encourage that person to reach out to me, or people wanted to share their story. There were people who during this time had been negatively impacted by COVID. And there were some people who were super skeptical that they could ever get it. Once they got it, they were ready to share their story because they wanted to make sure that everyone else yielded to taking it a lot more seriously. So surveying your members after events or the conclusion of a project to see if there were areas that you've overlooked is always really impactful too. All right, next. And this is my information. Maybe you are looking for different angles and marketing to be able to do that. And maybe within your organization, you don't necessarily know who to contact. I have a wealth of resources as a community member that I would be more than glad to share. It's something that I've done for years, is connect people to different organizations that exist. I am someone who I'm in so many different spaces. And of course, doing my publication, interviewing people, I get an opportunity to meet people from so many different spaces. And it's been an amazing value to me. So just getting an opportunity to be able to network with you all, being able to connect you all to different groups and spaces. Any questions? I know it's 1:02. I know we got started a little late, but if you all have any questions, I'll be more than glad to answer.
I don't see any in the chat. Eric Wilson did say thank you both.
There are a couple in the chat.
Yeah, there's 3 or 4 in
Oh. I apologize. I couldn't see it when I was sharing my screen, so sorry.
Miss Jamie Reed, that's a really great question. And I almost forgot to cover that. But during this time, because we were doing messaging that was targeted towards African Americans in Sedgwick County, they wanted us to actually take a stance on vaccinations. I myself had not really reached a point where I was comfortable with it. I also had misinformation. I thought that the vaccination came out way too soon. I thought it was way too fast for me to really trust. Through educating myself, I actually found out that that's not how it works. It has been around for a while. They've had to modify it and do so many different things. And so I'm glad that I never took a stance during this time, but I will share with you that we are reaching that point with the Wichita Black Alliance, that we will encourage vaccination. We do not personally, we don't want to personally, or as an organization, because we represent so many different groups and organizations, we're just going to encourage people to do the research for themselves to reach a decision that's best for them.
Okay. There was another question from Megan Carver. You mentioned billboards. What other tactics did you use to reach your target audience for the Facts Not Fear campaign?
We used TV commercials. We did COVID resource cards. We were a part of, I almost forgot the most important thing that we did, you all, is we distributed free masks. We've been doing it since the very, very beginning of this pandemic. So even before October, we had been distributing masks. That was another way of us being able to get information. We were giving people free yard signs that encouraged mask wearing. Those were some different things that we did. The virtual town halls was something that we did. And then we also used the podcasters, and that was such value because maybe they were on there entertaining or doing sports talk trash, that kind of stuff, and their people were tuning in order to hear sports. Well, then they'd be hit with a message that said, hey, don't forget to wear your mask. Hey, we want to support these local businesses. We know how important it is that you all want to go out. You want to go to the bars, you want to go to the clubs. Right now we're asking for you to sit this one out just a little while longer. We did commercials. You can actually go to KSN, KWCH, and you will actually be able to type in Facts Not Fear. Facts Not Fear, and you should be able to see our commercials. So we did commercials. We used a barbershop. We used a barbershop and did messaging there. We know that barbershops and other small businesses were some of the first who were impacted by the shutdown. So when we decided to do a commercial, we put you in the barbershop and we talked about, hey, I wear a mask for myself and I wear a mask for my barber. And that was another way that we were able to do that.
Okay. Another question, how did you distribute your surveys?
So what we did was, and it was a lot of hard work, we looked for people who gave any type of reaction. They could have been laughing at a commercial that we did because they were not in agreement with it. We still surveyed those people. They could have given an angry face to a video that we did encouraging mask wearing. We surveyed them too. So anyone who gave any reaction to anything, if they engaged with our Wichita Black Alliance page at all, then they received a request to do the survey. People who we saw comment, people who we saw share it, we sent it to them.
Okay. Are there any other questions? All right. Well, Denise and Tima, I can't thank you both enough for joining us today. And I know our group was small, but we have a great group of people and a great membership, and we're lucky to have you both today. So thank you for your time and sharing your stories with us.
Thank you all for the opportunity to present. It's a pleasure to meet you all. I am a member, and so I look forward to engaging with you all in the future.
All right. Well, mark your calendars for March 23rd for our next program. We will announce those details very soon. And I hope that you all have a wonderful day and enjoy the beautiful warm air and temperatures today. So